All right, hey everyone, welcome. We got Rarish in the studio today. Rarish, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. I've been super excited to have you on the show ever since I started doing it. Unfortunately, we've had like the time issue, but now that I'm not doing them live anymore, it's makes things a little easier, huh?
Yeah, the time zone issue.
So
Always the
so
time zone issue.
yeah, always, always. So Rarish, maybe that's a good segue to let you introduce yourself, where you're from, and what you do, and that kind of stuff.
Sure. So I'm Raresh. My name, my first name is a bit unique, even in like in Romania where I grew up. So I tell people you can kind of think about the radish vegetable with an R in the middle. I don't know, but I live in Scotland, so I have two cats, and I like to build uh, like huge playhouses for them in the garden so they can go outside and see the sun and watch some birds.
That's so
And
cool.
that's that's how I became that weird person in my neighborhood. Uh, that's but it's nice because people like I got to meet so many of my neighbors just by doing that because people just stop and talk to the cats and then
Yeah.
they just ask me questions or they just it's a good icebreaker.
Is it like the I've seen stuff people have in their houses for cats. I've never seen something outside, but it's like the platforms. Is that the idea or
Something like that, yeah. So it's I don't know if you can imagine it's like a cage but connected to the house. So it's like this one extension to the house that goes over the windows. So then we can just open the windows and they just go
Oh,
outside into it. And they have lots of shelves in it.
okay.
So that was last year, and then this year we built a new one, even bigger in the garden, and we connected them with a tunnel. So now they can kind of go through the tunnel and
That's so awesome. So and it's like all enclosed, so they can't
it
get out. Is that the
they
idea?
can't get out. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You give them a nice illusion of freedom.
But they love it so much. They love it.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. They
No, that sounds
watching the
really
birds.
cool, man. That's like crazy creative. I like that a lot. Had you heard of other people doing that, or did you just have the idea to go do it?
Um, I don't know. I've been researching a lot. So like since we got cats, like I got really into it. Like there's this guy Jackson Galaxy on YouTube, and he has loads of videos, and he talks about catifying your house. And we thought like we don't really want to let them outside, like outside, because we don't know what's gonna happen. Like there are lots of cars around. So okay,
Yeah.
let's see if there are solutions for this. Uh,
Yeah.
and it was nice because it was nice. It was a nice DIY project for me as well. Like,
Yeah.
because I'm not good with DIY. Like I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen with the house. Like if
Yeah.
anything goes wrong with the house, I usually just call my dad. Or, but this was enjoyable. It was like Lego, uh, a bit because we just
Yeah.
got all the pieces for. So it's called a catio. It's like a patio, but for cats. So it's like a catio.
That's
Um,
crazy.
so we just put all. Yeah.
I'm like terribly allergic to cats. To my daughter's chagrin, they love cats. They want one so bad. But last time we had them, we had a cat in the house. This was like years ago now, but it's like our family members brought a cat in the house for like a Christmas party, and for the next 2 weeks, my eyes were like I was almost blind. Like it was crazy, but yeah, cats are
Yeah.
cool. I like dogs. The dogs don't do that to me in terms of allergies. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a dog guy.
We have had some friends stay over last year, and some of them were
Oh,
allergic to cats.
yeah,
And sometimes they like our cats do so many cute things that sometimes they forgot, so they just
yeah.
went to them and petted them.
Oh, it's like a siren song, man. It's it's like they're so cute and they're so cool. You just want to play with them, but
Yeah,
no.
yeah. And the thing is, in our house, like there's hair everywhere. Like I don't think you would be able to survive in our house because like we find hair in like our coffee cups and like we
Oh
just have
yeah.
to be careful.
Well, that's what it was, man. It's like the weeks later, I'd still find like little pieces of hair in my shirt or something like
Mm,
that, and that's how it was getting to me. But yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Like I heard of some people developing cat allergies after they have cats.
Oh
And,
no.
like that's one of my biggest fears, just developing an allergy.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm okay because I grew up with a cat, so I think that's why I'm okay. Like my immune system is well aware of cat hair, and it's not overreacting.
This is a completely random other tangent, but I found out recently that, like you were saying, you can develop a cat allergy. It turns out you can develop lactose intolerance in your later years, which is I'm very scared of because I really like cheese. So I don't want to have to give it up. But yeah, you said that made me think of that.
Cheese is good, yeah. Can you get cheese without lactose? I'm sure you can find something. Maybe because you can get stuff without gluten, so maybe.
Is it really cheese then, though? Like that's the question. But yeah, Raj, I was thinking back and remembering back when you first joined Nrwl. So for everyone out there listening, in case you may not know, we work at Nrwl together, even though Raj is out in Scotland and I'm here in Arizona. But I remember we were working on NX Cloud was releasing at the time, right? And I was doing something with a form where like I was trying to make it. Like it was everyone's first impression of cloud, so I was trying to make it as cool as possible. So it was like a little thing to sign up for updates at the top right, and clicking that, I wanted to make it like scroll down to the bottom and like do a little animation on a form to like bump it a little bit, and then do all this stuff. And I remember I was like, okay, like there's an API for scrolling. I've got RxJS. We're gonna just make this work. I'm gonna wait. I think I had like an observable that was like when we scrolled to the right position, like the observable would fire, and I'd be listening to that to like start the animation on the form, just like doing the little bump thing and going back. I remember I had this like super complicated, like mega observable of operators, and Rarish just came on at Nrwl, and he was like, "Hey, what if we did this?" It was like literally taking my 50 lines of code and like taking it down to like 2 operators. And I was like, "Yeah, that'll work." So that was a really cool introduction to each other, I feel like, because I love the reactive stuff. I know you love it too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel, I think you were on paternity leave for a while. And like, I just, like when you came back, like, I think I had this backlog of links and RxJS stuff that I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
And I just sent it all to you at once. Like, I remember that just, you were really missed at that point.
Oh, yeah.
Talked about RxJS with anyone.
Yeah. But dude, yeah. I've been, well, we can get into this later, but I've been having lots of thoughts about RxJS recently too, just in terms of reactivity in general and stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah. So one thing, so you have like a course on RxJS stuff and reactive programming. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how do you find, so this is something I encounter a lot when you think about talking about reactivity and teaching it, like how do you go about it? That's a good intro to it.
No, it's a really good question. And yeah, because you have 2 ways. I don't know if you have if you have somebody really experienced with the problems of promises and arrays, like somebody just who's been using them a lot in some more advanced scenarios, scenarios where you have a lot of async events happening that need coordination, right? If you have somebody like that, then I would say you could go even from the perspective of just comparison, right? So you could just start comparing observables to promises.
I see that a lot. But yeah, like I think everyone talks about it in terms of like there's the promise, but you want to have like multiple things.
Exactly.
And so they say, well, it's half promise, half array, and there you go. Which I think I started out talking about things that way for a long time, but I've taken to now talking about it more in the lines of I think marble diagrams, for one, are a really good mental model for getting into observables to start. And I think two, like the way I like to talk about them, it's like a two-dimensional array, but the second dimension isn't a second spatial dimension. It's like a time dimension, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know how helpful that is for some people, because I say that some people just like eyes glaze over, right? But
yeah, no, I think it's useful when you talk about when you teach something, just to present different perspectives, right? Because different people have different contexts, and it might help depending on the angle you're trying to teach the subject from, right? So it's helpful to approach it from all of these different angles.
Yeah,
it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I feel like my explanation is very much like it's just taking what we said, like it's half promise, half array, and I just like turned that on its side just a little bit, but I'm essentially saying the same thing, right? So.
Yes, yeah. For example, in my course, or whenever I talk about them right now to someone who's not used them before, I try and approach it from two things. Like, first of all, I try and maybe find a really good scenario where that really lends itself to reactivity, right? And I try to talk about that. So some scenario where you have to coordinate a lot of different things, where like certain operators might come in useful, like switch map, or so I try and find a scenario like that would be very hard for somebody to just think about. Somebody who's only used promises, for example. So and then maybe that person can think about, okay, how would you solve it right now? And then we can talk about, like, maybe show how you'd solve it with observables. But once I show that, so that's one side, right? So just getting people interested and showing them the problems that they solve. But then you have the second part where people just look at them and think, okay, what is this, right? What is this magic? Like, how does these work? Because it's a completely new way of thinking, and it takes getting used to it. So that might put some people off. So then there's this really good talk that I actually posted on one of the Nrwl channels by Ben Lesh. It's called like building observables from scratch or something like that.
Yes.
And
he just lives code like observables in front of everyone.
He just lives code a much simpler version, but a pretty complete version of the library, right? That functions the same way. And so I think that's the second part. Like, if I manage to just show people, if they're interested, if they're hooked in by this point, to show them that, hey, they're mostly function calls.
Yeah.
Right? They're mostly function calls. They're synchronous. They're like a function, right? Functions are lazy, right? You don't, like, if you just define a function, it's not going to go off and get itself called, right? Only when you call it, it's going to start doing the work. Same with observables. Like, only when you subscribe to it, then it's going to start going up the chain and call all of the functions for each of the operators. So I think once people see that, like, it really simplifies the mental model. And I know that was a big shift for me as well, just watching that talk and seeing, like, hey, it's not that much is happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway from that talk of Ben's was he says somewhere, like, it's not magic. Like, promises are kind of magic. Like, there's the whole thing going on with the micro event queue or micro task queue and weird stuff around that. But when you look at observables, and especially like just how they're done, like, you can kind of see, okay, like the circle closes without too much effort in terms of understanding everything going on with it. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like promises. Yeah, with the micro task queue, where like you have like macro task and then micro tasks, and micro tasks get picked up first. Like, there's a lot of nuance to promises that you just have to know.
Yeah. Well, it's like actual changes they have to make into the engine or to the to the language, to make this stuff work, right? Where you're actually adding in new mechanisms, whereas observables, it's like you were saying, you can just describe them all with functions and callbacks. So
yeah. And I also really like the composability aspect of Observable. So that's actually a big part of my course, is just, so it focuses a lot on taking a big problem and then decomposing it into smaller problems.
Yes.
Kind of creating really small observables that just make sense on their own, right? So that solve each one of those problems on their own. And then once you have all of these small observables that solve really specific problems on their own, you start composing them. And in the end, you end up with this really nice flow that solves all of your initial requirements.
Yes.
And also kind of reads like English, right? So you kind of go for the top, and it goes, hey, when we get a click, show a spinner until, I don't know, some time has passed.
Yeah.
So you kind of get this English.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's one of my favorite things about observables and like code that uses observables is like maybe thinking in the context of Angular. Often when we get dropped into like consulting roles, when we're inheriting someone else's code, when there's just like imperative like setting of class properties within methods and stuff, it's like, okay, here's the declaration for this property up at the top of the class. Let's do Command F or like find all references for that thing to see how many times it's being set and in one context. And then, so what I essentially have to do is like, I'll usually do pen and paper and just like draw out a map. How can this change? All the different ways this changes. But if I get RxJS code, like that property now becomes an observable. Everything about that property and how it could change is defined right there in that locality to account for all that stuff. So I don't have to write the map. Like in some ways, that map is right there in the code, as long as you know how to like parse it, right? And that's definitely a tricky part, is training your brain how to parse it, and that doesn't come free. But once you do have it, it's like it's a one-time investment in the developer that once they have it, it can really speed things up. So I always try to preach that kind of stuff for teams and for developers to boost themselves. But yeah.
I watched your talk a while ago at Seattle.js about reactivity, and I really liked your example with the braids, like how initially you have like it's untangled and it's easy to follow. You can clearly follow each path in the braid, but then it gets more tangled, and once you need to change something at a specific level, you have to trace back everything, detangle it, and kind of re-put it back together. So
that's the worst part, though, is like not only do you have to trace it back to figure out how it's tangled, you have to retangle it after you've made your change. It's just like, oh, it's so self-defeating. Like you're putting this in, and yes, you accomplished the task, but to me, it just seems like, oh man, I just made so much more friction for myself in the future, right?
Yeah. I think that was a big part of why people liked React hooks as well, because they kind of like they allowed you to bring, so you had all of these states scattered throughout your component. Like I don't know much about React, so but I've used them for a bit, and so you kind of have all these isolated pieces of state, and with hooks you can kind of describe how that state changes in one place, like all of that together. You don't have to rely on like component lifecycle hooks, which are scattered throughout the class. You can just work in a single place and follow the logic in a single place.
Right.
So you avoid that scattering effect.
Yeah, I mean, I should preface it by saying I don't do much in React either, but I've been doing the Kent C. Dodds course on it. I'm like halfway through the advanced hooks right now, and man, there was some stuff in there that was really inspiring, almost like the way those React hooks can like compose themselves, like just by taking other hooks and composing them down into like a single hook per component if you wanted to. That just takes several other hooks and puts them together, and it's like there you go. It's kind of like here's like the inner workings. It's separating out like the dynamic pieces of this component and putting it into a hook, and then you just expose some things as a result of the hook, or in the return for the hook, and you just write your JSX or your TSX, I guess. And that's like, in many ways, it's to me, it's like, I look at that and I'm like, this is the same thing. Like, this is what I do with RxJS and Angular. It's just, but the code in no way looks the same. That's maybe the weird part about it. So, and I don't know. It feels like the React hook system is maybe a little bit more imperative, but it's like it's contained imperativeness, which sometimes I wish RxJS was a little bit more like. So I don't know. Are you familiar enough with React hooks to have an opinion on that? I'm still forming mine. I'm still like, what use is RxJS and React even? Like, so
yeah, I've not used RxJS in React that much. Like I know people use things like Redux observables or or trunks, I think, but I've not used it that much, so I don't know. Well, one thing I wanted to say about hooks is that I think they're just a really good example of how so like you have all of these weird rules with hooks, I think, where you have to keep them at the top level, and you have some lint rules to guard against that, because otherwise they wouldn't work. So you can't have them like nested inside an if statement. And that's weird initially to people. Like, I can see why some people would be like, whoa, what's happening there? But they solve so many problems that I think, sometimes we have these rules in programming that we're just following blindly. But I think sometimes you can make like a big step like this if it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I know they did some other weird thing, like where they're, with the new suspense, like they're throwing a promise at one point. So like that's kind of how it works under the hood. Like they're using the throw statement to...
They're throwing a promise?
They're throwing a promise, right?
What?
Yeah, it's... I know there was a lot of talk about this, but if it solves the problem and if it's good for that use case, I don't know.
Yeah. I have not looked at suspense at all. Jack and I were talking about it earlier this week a little bit, just enough so I kind of understand what it is. But yeah, I'm very intrigued by a lot of these things. It's kind of neat, and well, to see a community where stuff still happens. I feel like almost in Angular things have been kind of stagnant for a while. So. Yeah, I mean, we got Ivy not too long ago, but at least in terms of my use case and my everyday like interaction with Angular, there's not much difference from that, right? And maybe that's a good thing. Like, you don't need to change your code all that much. You shouldn't need to change your code all that much, and you just kind of get the advantage of a better renderer. So that sounds solid, but yeah.
That's one of the advantages of Angular, that you can just like, okay, you have these templates and maybe they look weird, like it's harder to learn.
Oh, I love the templates.
Developers. Yeah, but at the same time, they can just keep optimizing the compiler under the hood and just keep generating more and more optimized code, which is hard to do in React, where anybody can just stick any kind of JavaScript they want and their JSX, right? And it's they don't have that control. They don't know how people will use the tree, right?
Yeah.
So having said that, like, I don't know, like, it depends on the use case, right? So it might be faster for some use cases.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the templates as well.
Yeah, it may be mainly familiarity for me, but like, first of all, I like having the template in a different file. Like, I know that's one of the big things against it, but I kind of like that. Like, I have my IDE always set up so that, like, this is mirrored, but like my template's on the left hand side and my code's on the right hand side, and it feels right to me, you know. Whenever I bring up a component, and so and there's enough stuff around it. Like, once you get like going into, going into weird stuff with ng templates can definitely get weird pretty quick, right? But like just doing a little stuff with ng containers, and you can get pretty good at stuff pretty quickly without it being too weird. So
one thing I still struggle with is what if I have, for example, like multiple if conditions, right? And like I sometimes end up with
nested ternaries,
nested ng containers, and
like a ng if else if kind of
something like that. Yeah. So what if or different conditions? Like what if I need to name? Okay, this component depends on a feature flag, but it also depends on a loading state.
Yes.
So you kind of end up with these.
Well, I think often I find myself like coding around that, you know, like I will either do something where I have like a view model observable that kind of like wraps everything up, and I'll like distill those things down to a single one and like do an ng switch on it with like a union type, and that works out decently well to just get around some of that nesting. Like ng switch is still kind of weird, but most people get switch statements. That's not that odd, right? So
that's true. Yeah. You can just move everything into an observable that kind of accounts for all of those conditions, maybe, and you ng if on that.
So just my pattern with Angular now, I think a lot of people are moving this way, is like have a lot of private observables, kind of like what you were talking about, where you have like self-contained observable that describes, okay, here's this one thing, and then I'll like have a function outside of the class of the observable entirely, but it just says create view model from this, and it'll take these input observables and will spit out an observable of this single view model object. And then inside my template, if there's a convenient place to do it, I'll put it on like the top level element. Otherwise, I'll stick an ng container up there and just do like ng if with the async pipe and as view model, and then it's like, okay, I'm subscribed, you know. So
I think the like the new ngrxLet operator like that helps so much, and I'm surprised that it took, I don't know, like I think there was I created a few years ago I created a similar library just to play around with it, just because I felt like it was such a necessary addition.
I shy away from ngrxLet, man. I got burned by that once, and I really? Lost an hour to it. Yeah, it doesn't. At least when it first came out, this was like maybe my fault for bandwagoning it too soon, because I was like jumping on as soon as it came out because I was so excited. But it didn't quite work the same when I think it was like something where it was inside of an ng if anyways, so the pipe was inside of that itself. It didn't quite render right, or it didn't quite work right. So I'll go back to ng if now and just do that. Yeah, I mean it's so the ngrxLet that was this pipe. It's a pipe, right? Yeah, it's a pipe.
It's a structural directive, right?
A structural directive. That's right. Yeah. Yes, just like ngIf. Right.
Yeah. So you still need to use the async pipe, I think, or I'm not
sure. I don't think we need to, but I think it is using it behind the scenes. Like I think you just pass in the observable and then its new name. I want to say, maybe I'm saying the wrong thing.
Okay.
But yeah, the idea behind it, like the big driver is, if you have an observable of a string, for example, and you want to try to do this with ngIf, that string could be falsy, or a number could be falsy. It could be 0, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you intend to do is like have an observable that you subscribe to inside of your template, but the ngIf goes falsy and the element disappears from the DOM. And that was like the big thing ngrxLet was kind of there to solve. And also just because it's hacky. Like, why are we doing an ngIf? We don't really ever want to not show this. We just want to subscribe and declare a variable. So,
exactly.
I don't know. In general, too, I think I feel like I'm pretty familiar with Angular. There's some stuff about the template I'm very shaky on, like declaring. I always feel weird about it, but like you can declare a reference to like an element, for example, by using that hashtag syntax.
Mm-hmm.
And I know about it. I don't often reach for it. I feel like I could sometimes, and it would really clean up some code. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I always go back to. I feel like it's super powerful when designing components, like all of those APIs with templates, template refs, view containers. I feel like it's super powerful for designing reusable components and shared components, right?
Yeah.
And but I always end up going back to reading about it. Like it's something that just I never fully understand, and I always have to remind myself, like, what is the difference? Like, what's a view container ref? What's a template ref? How do I read that? What is, when I do a view child, what's the difference between static or not? So like that's a part of Angular that I just keep having to go back to remind myself. But I think it's good that I know it exists and I know that I can use it, right? So, and also I really recommend people, if they want to learn more advanced Angular, I really recommend looking at the source code for ng4. So that is, if you just look at the source code for that, it goes so much into like details around how powerful, because Angular exposes you this API for parsing your template, and you have that I don't know, let x of my list, and then you have let index, let so on. So you get access to all of these. All of this information from the ng4, and all of that is not magic. Like it's an API that Angular provides, which just happens to look nice for ng4. But you can use the same API to build your own structural directives. I always learn so much when I go look at the source code for ng4.
Yeah, I'll put in the links to this video too. Isaac has some really good articles on this that we talked about in the past. Isaac Mann from Nrwl. And I just remember being like, I didn't know what a structural directive was at the time. Like I assumed there was just like some magic ones, right? Like ngIf and ng4, and then I was like, oh, this is doing stuff with that ng template nonsense I never bothered to learn. Right? So that was an eye opener. Again, I don't often use it. Like, even looking up how to do like the ng else properly is like a little bit of I feel like I can probably do it now by myself without having to look it up. But like view child, like using the view child decorator to take a element from your template and bring it into your TypeScript. I always have to look up how to do that. Like it's just odd syntax, and like when you declare things with a hashtag versus when you like just pass in a CSS selector in there, and it's like sometimes you get a native ref, sometimes you get the component ref.
Yeah,
it's odd.
Exactly. And in addition to that, like it's also you have to know about the lifecycle hooks if you want to use them. So sometimes you'll use them and you'll see like, hey, it blows up that, hey, this view child is not available, and then I need to use it in the after. I need to know I can use it only after viewing it.
Yes.
Right? Or sometimes after content in it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the part of the Angular API that can put people off, right? So you look at that, and then you look at maybe something like React, and it seems a lot simpler. But it's very powerful. Like once you get used to it, it makes a lot of sense. So
yeah, well, I remember when I was first learning Angular. So I was like coming from Java worlds, and I was just like a very junior developer at the time. This is like right as Angular 2 is coming out, right? And I remember taking this course on it and seeing the lifecycle hooks and thinking, this is probably very important. I better go in and like learn this very, very well. And like I did, and then I like started programming stuff. I was like, I don't really need those. Like it's rarely you need to know about them. Like you need to know about init. You need to know about just like when they're happening. But like I remember my first project because I was like so intent on them. I was like hooking into the do checks
Yeah.
So I was using like template driven forms, and like I was trying to make things reactive, but rather than go to like the nice reactive forms, I was like, let's hook into do check, and we'll just do callbacks on every do check, which yeah, it worked pretty well. Like in terms of the code was awful, but in terms of how it worked, the clients were very pleased with it and worked really quick. So it is what it is. But yeah.
I remember spending like so much time because like most of my background is with Angular, and initially I worked in AngularJS, and then we started converting it to Angular 2 when it came out, and I remember reading so much about all of these, like the push, like the on push change detection. How does that change it? Yeah, it was like just some really interesting, like it made so much sense at that time, like going from Angular JS and then to Angular 2, just the whole new approach to the component tree and how it can just update from the top. And like changes go from the top towards the bottom always, and then you can cut off change detection at one point, right, if you don't need it to go further. So I remember that just made so much more sense
Right.
at that time. So yeah.
Yeah. One of the big things you mentioned this too. One of the big things for me, because I do use even though I use it quite a bit, I still always have to look it up. The view children or the view child and view children. But like I think it was Angular 8 when you could just have a static view child, so you could mark it as being static, and that way it's ready for you inside of the on init hook, rather than, like you said, having to wait until the after view init hook, which that made everything so much nicer, because I was like having to delay things until after view init and then do stuff there, and
is there a reason why you might not want it static, or why?
Yeah. So if you can't do static if it's inside of like a ngIf. Like if that template might not be there, because then like if it's static, the view child can know, all right, it's by the time we hit the on init hook, you can just put things where it needs to be in terms of like the component object, right? But if it's not necessarily there, if it could not be there, then like things would blow up unless you wait for after view init, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that comes in. But man, every time I talk about lifecycle hooks too, why are these not observables? Why? or why is there like them not being observables? I think is kind of forgivable, but they're not being like a widely accepted like API or even a community API for doing this is like a little bit frustrating. I always end up doing like subjects and calling next instead of like on changes and stuff.
Yeah,
which is fine. I mean, that may be why there is no like widely accepted APIs, because it's relatively easy to just do it with subjects. But yeah,
I thought like I remember after Ivy got released, a lot of people were doing these experimental talks where they were demoing the power of Ivy and how now you can do stuff like this, right? So they had observable lifecycle hooks or observable inputs, right? So they had this, but I've not.
That would be the big thing. Yeah, that's what I was using for, is like an input that may change. And you always have to like be like, okay, here's the real input, but ignore that because it's a lie. It's imperative. Let's look at this private subject instead.
Yes, exactly. It does help that you can just use the setter, for example, for inputs. Put that in a subject, and then you just work with the subject. But I just find it so much like inputs. Yeah, lifecycle hooks, I've not used them that much in observable form, but inputs, I use them a lot just because I find, so inputs by themselves, a lot of times like are not really that useful to me. It's mostly how they change together.
Yes.
Right? So when you have a component with different inputs, and a lot of the times I need to do different things depending on how those inputs change together.
Yes.
So that's when I always reach out for subjects and I just combine them, and so that's I find it really useful for that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Like almost always, it's for the inputs. But I was thinking in terms of lifecycle hooks because you got to do that work inside of the do change or the on changes, right?
Oh yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah. Sometimes I reach for that. Yeah, when it's a small change I need to make, right? When I
yeah,
need to coordinate different inputs in a small way.
yeah. Well, and then all you have to do is have like a subject. Whenever you see the on change get called, check to see if that input was in there, and then call next on it. And now you've got your observable for that input, kind of. Like it's not coming out of the box, but I mean, I guess it only takes a couple lines. So
Yeah.
it's one of those
Subject
patterns
is,
you learn quick. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Subject is another thing I find difficult to explain to people. Like once, like okay, you go for observables, and now hey, you have this other type of observable that's like I've heard the explanation a lot where it's an observable but also an observer, so you can put things you can do next on it. But again, that's like people who haven't used RxJS a lot, that doesn't ring a lot of bells, right? Like why would I need to do a next on an observable?
Right, and the word observer I don't think registers with most people. It didn't register with me at first, even after having been in RxJS for a long time.
Exactly.
Normally, like so when Ben Lesh did his talk, he used he was creating observables by calling new observable and passing in an observer, which you can like call next, error, and complete on, which is the same things you can do with the subject. And yeah, that was one of the biggest things for me because I've done that before. I always thought that was the wrong way to do it. Like you should always use the helper stuff like from events and other APIs that do it for you was my thinking. But seeing him do that, I was like, okay, maybe I wasn't on the wrong path after all back then.
Yeah, the way I approach that in my course, like on Egghead, is I showed it as a way to connect your imperative codes to your reactive streams. So, for example, you had this service that had all of this reactive logic already encapsulated in it, but now you want to expose it to developers, right? So you have the advantage of using these streams inside your service. But now and it does a lot of cool stuff, like your service does all this cool stuff and it's extendable. You can change it if you want, like it's easy to change, it's readable. But now maybe you want to hand it over to some developers to use that are not using RxJS, right? So how do you do that transition from, how do you allow developers to just use it in their imperative code or in any context without requiring them to know about RxJS? And in my code, I just export some functions so developers can just call some functions, and those functions do next on some subjects.
Yeah.
And at that point, I have my subjects. I can start off my streams and I can start off my logic.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like my example for subjects in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
I like your background. Like do you have like a special? Do you have like a special? It's like did you put it especially for like live streaming or?
I did. So the idea was to do it like a green screen in my office. So like it's actually nailed into the wall right now, but the green screen failed spectacularly. Like I can't get it to go without. Like if I get the background to disappear, like parts of my forehead will disappear too, and it's just like not the right shade of green. So we're moving. We're in the process of moving right now, so we're gonna fix that soon. But
yeah.
One of the things I always think about with subjects is like the concept of hot and cold, right? Like that's, to me, that's kind of why subjects exist. And like, I don't know, like I think about this stuff. You think, once you get into subjects, especially like the dimensions of RxJS and like just not the library so much, but just the concept of it start to unfold, and things get really unmanageable really quick. I feel like you have a hot dimension and a cold dimension. You have for subjects, you have like a I don't know what to call it, like an emission strategy. Like there's the vanilla subject that's just going to emit when you call next, but then there's the replay subject, which is going to replay the last X emissions it saw, and then there's the behavior subject, which is kind of like it's like a replay subject one, but not really, because it's also like actually has memory in it that you can get to. Like when I first started with RxJS, actually, I used behavior subjects all the time. And I thought it was so clever because like, this is so easy. I could seamlessly combine imperative and like this reactionary code because behavior subjects has the dot value that you can just always pull out, right? Of the behavior subject. I would actually do stuff where using behavior subjects by default, I'd subscribe to one behavior subject to call next on another behavior subject, which completely eliminated the need for operators. Actually, like I was doing switch mapping like conceptually just by doing stuff like that, which was I thought it was clever at the time, but now I look back, I was like, oh God, because I would get to these points with my code. Once things got sufficiently complex, that's when I started doing like what I was telling you, where I had to like, okay, let's map out everywhere I'm calling next on this observable. Or on this behavior subject, and you get to that. And so getting them to instead just writing the very declarative stuff where everything's at the top. You can describe exactly how this thing moves as things go along. So
do you know why it's called a behavior subject? Or because like replay subject makes sense, subject makes sort of sense, behavior subject I don't think I've ever read like why.
I don't know the reason for calling it a behavior subject. Actually, I assume there's something about like a behavior strategy that would assume like the idea is there's always some value for that thing in memory somewhere that you can just access, right? So it's like a little different from replay subject, but for a lot of purposes it's like the same as a replay subject. So I thought, I don't know.
There's probably some history around it.
Yeah, so I've talked to Ben too, and to some other people on the RxJS core team, and they're in a lot of ways they're trying to follow same ReactiveX APIs from other languages that have their own kind of. So trying to unify it across the different languages. So it may be that it came from one of those other, legacy ReactiveX libraries that they just brought in. So that would be my guess. I actually don't know, but getting to that, getting to all these different dimensions of like the observables. It's like I almost wonder, like, could they have just flattened those dimensions a little bit? Like I imagine the reason they can unfold so much is so you can be that precise and that have that level of precision when you write your code to like perfectly encapsulate like switch mapping versus merge mapping versus exhaust mapping versus cat mapping. Did I say that one all right? I don't know. So and I know the differences between them, but I always. Every time I use one, I'm like, I think in the back of my head, I've got to write a unit test for this to make sure it's working the way I think it is. Because I've been burned. I've been burned many times, Raj.
I always tell people to default to concat map because that's like the safest one. Because
I always default to switch map.
It's like you probably want to switch. You probably want to switch to switch map most of the time. But by default, like I always tell people, okay, go with concat map, then think about the use case and see if you can make it more performant, right, with switch map. But like in my head, like concat map, that way, like it's the safest one in terms of you're always waiting for your inner observable to finish, and you're always you're not dropping any of the source emissions you get.
Right.
So
everything's accounted for.
Yes.
And Yeah. The reason I reach for switch map by default is, I always worry when using concat map, because concat map you need for the observable you're passing into, or you're returning from the concat map to complete. And so I always go to switch map because I just want to say, well, don't worry about that yet. We'll worry about that later. So it's just like, it's the same exact thought process, I think, if you're thinking, but just prioritizing, making sure we hear everything over making sure everything runs. So
exactly, yeah. I have seen some issues in NgRx store. Like, I think switch map is so popular and a lot of people default to it, and I think like you want to think about your use case, I guess, the takeaways here. Because I see, for example, in NgRx, like, people just default to switch map.
Yes.
And then, like, for example, for NgRx, like, for most cases, like, you get an action, you want to do something with that action, and you want that to complete, right? Like, you want it to finish, right? So, for example, if you have a counter and you want to save your results to the server, like, you want that to complete before you, I guess you drop it and you increase. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe it's not the best example, but
yeah. That one, if you switch map, you'll like ignore the responses, but they'll still have gone out at least, right?
So, yeah, exactly.
It just gets weird. I guess depending, like, if you were actually incrementing. So rather than just saying sending a message across the wire to increment, if you sent a message across the wire that says, here's the new count, then switch map would definitely get you in trouble, right? Versus concat map.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know. Are you following what I'm laying down? This is what I'm talking about, though. Like, it's hard to talk about these things even without like having some diagram in front of you, because like, you just got to be so precise, and there's so many dimensions to this. I actually think NgRx is really, really good at helping flatten the dimensions of RxJS too, just because like when you have a selector, it emits with a behavior strategy, and like, for the longest time, before I even knew there was other strategies in hot and cold, I was just always using NgRx. So I was like, okay, these things always work the same, really, usually. So let's just do that, and that makes things nicer. When things are at least coming, like, you get something as soon as you subscribe to it. That's always helps. Like, kind of flatten that complexity versus, like a form control. The value changes. That does not of it as soon as you subscribe to it. So you either gotta like start with or do something there. So yeah, or like put on a share replay or something. But
in terms of NgRx hygiene, if it's not a too involved question, like where do you like to put most of your logic? Like selectors. How do you think about effects, reducers, and selectors?
I've been thinking about this a lot, Raj. I'm very glad you asked. So this has been my thinking recently, and it's half baked. So forgive me if it comes across a little incoherent. But I think a lot of people think of your source of truth in NgRx being like the actual store object, like the thing the reducer. The state, I guess you could say, right? Like that thing, the JSON object that lives somewhere else, that like this whole thing's wrapping up. I don't think that's true, actually, though. I think the actual source of truth is your action stream. Like, and that's maybe a very reactive way of thinking about it, but really, to me, it seems like the reducers and that state object are all just implementation detail. Like, the only thing that matters is the action stream, like what happened and when it happened, and everything else is just kind of like you could have done everything else a million different ways. As long as you did that action stream the right way, like that's the only piece that matters. And like your selectors then are very important too, but like the sort of the logic of the selectors is again implementation detail based on what you did in that reducer, right? So yeah. That's
an interesting way to think about it, because so now it makes a bit more sense what I think Brandon said, because I always thought, I think he recommended just to not listen for state changes inside your effects, right? And I always thought like, but why would we want to send more information and actions? Why do we want to move that responsibility to the components to send extra informations and actions when they can just send the minimum amount of information?
Yes.
And then in RFX we can just listen to the source of truth, which is the state, right? Because I thought about it like that for a long time as well. But I guess it makes more sense, right, to think about your app as kind of like a stream of different actions, and the state is just kind of it's a derived state from that. So
exactly,
we just derive some state from the actions that helps the components render some view, right?
Yeah.
But the actions themselves are what should drive the changes. So yeah, that way of thinking about it makes sense. And kind of another thing that
Go ahead. I'll bring up what I was going to say later.
Another thing that Brandon said was like reducers are boring and we should keep them that way. I was wondering like how do you think about that? Because like for me, I really liked the idea of reducers because they're these pure functions that are easy to test, right?
Yeah.
And then they listen to actions and you can define how state changes based on the actions. So I thought, oh yeah, this is the perfect place because it's the simplest kind of logic you can get. You have a function, that's it. You can just test it.
Yeah.
But I think he recommended just moving most of your logic to your selectors. So that's
Yeah.
about it.
I think it goes with what I was saying a little bit, like reducers, like the shape of the state in the reducers, I think are kind of just like implementation detail that like it could matter, but like I tend to think of it as like make sure the action has everything you need on it, and then just like most of the time it's just spread the old state and stick the payload from the actions in the right spots. Like that's usually what my reducers come down to. I do try to make sure like there's no redundant information in my state as much as possible too. So I think that's probably what Brandon's talking about when he says keep your reducers kind of boring.
Yes.
So
it makes sense then. Yeah. So reducers are kind of like how you define how information from your actions actually gets stored, and then in your selectors, that's where you decide how you actually want to combine that information and deliver it in a useful way to your view.
Because otherwise I think like I was definitely not probably like at the start of this year in kind of a mindset very similar to what you just described not that long ago, which was like, let's make sure this action only has like the relevant information in it, like to the actual event. And what I would end up having to do in that situation is, well, since this only has like these X, Y, and Z pieces of information, but I need this other stuff from the other half of the store, like I would end up doing something like, well, this action gets dispatched, but then we have an effect that listens for that action, combines it with other information from the store, and then like dispatches that. And really all you're doing in that situation is just like dispatching an action to dispatch an action to like do this weird, like almost unnecessary chaining if you had just passed all that information with the action to begin with,
Yes.
which
kind of probably do it in a selector as well. Like if you find yourself grabbing a lot of information from the store in your effect, maybe that's a sign you can have a selector for that. And
well, this comes like full circle with that view model idea, right? Because if you have all the information like that you need for your component inside that view model, it becomes pretty trivial to then just like grab that thing and like have it dispatch the action with that as part of the payload. So I don't know. When I think of good action hygiene, I used to think, well, you got to name things properly, right? And now I think more in lines of, well, let's make sure the events we're dispatching are actually our events. Because when you get to that action chaining too, I think you get to where you have much more command-based actions instead of just like clicking that button to just, that should be one event. It should be an event that like triggers another event because we needed some more information to add on to that. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just trying. Yeah, because I always thought And I guess it helps a lot, like with the recent updates to NgRx, like declaring actions is much simpler now.
Oh yeah, I've gone to where all my state stuff, like for a certain slice of the store, is in one file, just because, and it's usually around 50 lines, because like that's all you need for everything, for the reducer, for the actions, for the selectors, and for the effects.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Sometimes effects can get kind of unmanageable, and I'll break them out into their own file. But yeah. Yeah, the other thing I was going to say was like going back to like the action stream being like the big source of truth. In light of that, I very often inject the action stream into places, and this is something that's maybe even maybe a quarter baked, because I've brought this up to Brandon and Mike before in the past, and they were like, I guess you could do that, but I don't know. I think there's really something there, because if that's your real source of truth, then it makes sense to just like drop that into like just to a component, for example. Like modals are maybe a good example of this, where like you want to wait until the modal closes, or you want to close the modal once you see that like a response that you sent out came back successful. Like there's a lot of ways you could do that, where you wanted to like hang, like maybe there's like a loading thing on the modal, but then when you hear that event, you actually want to close down the modal. That's one scenario where I'll just like drop in the action stream, and if there's an event that corresponds to that specific like response coming back, I'll just wait for that. This gets me into another place I'm doing stuff that like departs from the larger community, but I'll just use async await. Like I'll throw this, it's an observable, but I'm just calling toPromise on it so I can use async await, because I find that just reads so much better.
Yeah. But, no, I'm up for anything that just makes your code. Is it more readable? Does it make sense? Is it simpler?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're doing something weird. I like that example with the actions. I guess, if it makes sense for the use case, I always thought about it in terms of like components should dispatch actions into this void, and then you have this other place where you handle that, right? You handle how you respond to actions, and then components on the other end just listen to state changes. So I've always had like this model is ingrained into my head.
Yes.
And I don't know, when I think about, okay, what could be like if components listen to actions, you kind of circumvent that flow, and then you can I don't know if you can run into an issue where components are now communicating directly with other components. You're just mixing all of this together. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe that could get dangerous, but like I definitely resonate with what you were saying. Like there's this pattern, and you don't mess with the pattern, right? But sometimes like you kind of need to mess with the pattern, you know? Like
you need to talk about Fight Club.
Yeah. Sometimes you need to talk about Fight Club. But like thinking about it more, like the idea of like dispatching into the void and then just like completely detached, listening to changes to that state. I feel like that's almost like more of a liability than like a benefit if you think about it, you know? Like you're sometimes you want to know about, well, I sent out an HTTP request, WTF happened to it, you know? And like if you're going with some of the strict NgRx stuff, it's like, well, you don't know, like I guess throw a Boolean in the state, but like that's what I'm getting at. Like you get to a point where if all you're doing is like putting a Boolean into the store to say like, is this done yet? Because that's like usually what you have to listen to if you don't do things this way. It's like why are you really doing that? Like really all you need is that action to see that action got emitted. And if you put that in a reducer, you're just like, I feel like that's just convoluting the logic rather than just like, well, in this situation, let me just listen for it. Let me just listen for it from the central action stream.
Yeah.
So
No,
I don't know. It's really cool. I'm continuously impressed, man, with the code for NgRx, because it's so composable and feels like you can do this kind of stuff easily. Like it's the actions is just an injectable. As it seems like that's exactly what it should be.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Have
I don't
you
know.
developed at all with? Because I heard it's like it just has out of the box support for
Yeah.
RxJS, and like Ben Lesh is always talking about it, like how it's reactive by default.
Yeah. Oh man, I want to get into it. Here's my thing though. I wanted to. We're already over our hour. Do you have somewhere you got to be?
No, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, cool. We'll keep going then for a little bit at least. But like my big thing for this year, I wanted to talk to you all about resolutions for this new year. But one of my things is I want to. I feel like I live in the heap. This is what I told Caitlin. I live in the heap. I go from like one topic that kind of interests me and I spend like an hour, maybe 2 hours on it, like getting nothing useful or solid from it, but like just kind of exploring. And then I like go, oh, there's something shiny over there. And I go do that and spend like a couple hours on it. And I kind of keep doing that. And I was thinking like by the end of 2020, for example, I was like, well, what do I have to show for the year? A rambling path through a bunch of stuff. and like a bunch of like random odd knowledge about things. So I'm trying to get it to where I am focused on like one thing a month. That's like one of my capstones for the year. So this first month I'm looking to do like focus on like my personal site. That's kind of like my project. Next month is going to be React. One of these months I have to do Svelte because I've always been super interested in it. The reactive stuff is cool, but to me the coolest thing about Svelte has always been the fact that you don't ship Svelte. And that seems like what all of these frameworks should have been from the start, you know? So I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I've not looked into Svelte at all. Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, like if like some things I really want to try out this year is Next.js, just learn a bit more about it. This new remix platform that's coming out from Lion Florence. I really, really want to try that. And also just play around with serverless a bit more. And explore how powerful that is. And
anything in particular about serverless? Like, are you thinking like a Firebase or the whole stack is kind of serverless? Or are you thinking like specifically serverless functions or something like that?
Serverless functions, serverless services. Like I think Jason posted like a really nice thread on Twitter about how he built like this complete site with a whole backend and like a database and everything like really, really quickly. Yeah. And I think he was using not FaunaDB, I think like some other database as a service, and it was just super easy. So I just want to explore that a bit more. But yeah, mostly I'm interested in how like there seems to be like a lot of focus recently for combining like the power of the back end and the front end and just trying to optimize that as much as possible. So because we always had this separation, but now with platforms like Next.js, because you own both the back end and the front end for that, you can do some really, really cool optimizations. For Remix as well, you can do a lot of really, really nice optimizations because of that, because you own both the back end and the front end. So really looking forward to that. Things like Hotwire. So we discussed that a bit in the stand-up today. Like it was like how again, like with that, like the idea is you just ship HTML over the wire instead of just JSON, and you open up WebSocket and then you just stream HTML updates. Okay.
Like that makes a lot of sense, right? It's like it sounds kind of familiar though. But yeah, like so I was initially like kind of interested in Hotwire, and just because like it's DHH and he does cool stuff. But like Hey, so they built it for Hey, right? I heard a lot of I don't know if you had the same impression, but I never tried it, and I heard a lot of like performance issues with it, and so I don't know. I just that's got me a little cautious, and I've never learned Ruby, so Hotwire uses Ruby a lot, right?
Yeah,
I'm
they
not
do.
sure.
Yeah, so like, yeah, Ruby on Rails, like they're full on because yeah, DHH, like that was yeah,
That's
he
his
created
thing,
that.
right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so they're full on using that, and I think that's why Hotwire has a lot of support for like on the Ruby platform right now, and a lot of the docs are aimed around that. But I would be really interested to try it. But the thing is, I don't know where to start. If I've
Yeah.
never used Ruby on Rails or Laravel before. But I've used Hey, yeah, and it's yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel like a phone. Like I don't know. On the phone, it's okay. On the web, yeah, okay. It doesn't have that responsiveness of like a full SPA app,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's I don't know. It's fast. It works okay. There are some issues
Uh-huh.
which I do feel like a lot of the times you end up deep inside like this. So you click on something, you click on something else, and then something else.
Yeah.
Then um, when you go back, like it doesn't remember the states of the previous or like the scrolling position. So if you're really scrolled down a list, you click on something. When you go back, it takes you back towards the beginning. So those things are hard when you when you just destroy the DOM or just recreate
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the thing I really love about web development recently is like trending towards being like a full app, like a full distributed system, rather than sort of like a client server relationship. And so I really like the
Yeah.
APIs like Firebase and WebSockets kind of stuff, using those kinds of paradigms rather than like just a pull based architecture. So
Yeah, that's a nice way to
that
think about it. Yeah, that's why I really like the idea of React server components as well. And
yeah, I
that's
really need to get into that stuff, man. So is Next.js? That's like, is that React Server Components or is that a different thing?
no, it's a different. Yeah, so it's a meta framework. So
Okay.
it's a framework built on top of React. Um, but yeah, because so so going back to this idea where yeah you control the backends on it as well. Like they can expose a lot of interesting things like so you can so they do SSR, but you can also pre-render a lot of your pages, and like they have so many neat ideas. Like for example, they have different functions like get static props, I think, or get server props, and you can kind of define. So it's very configuration based. So you
Yeah.
need to call it get static props, but once you call it, you can define how to get your data at build time.
Yeah.
Get server props, like you can
Yeah.
define how to get your data more dynamically, right? If it changes.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
like, is that a way of like putting session information into the DOM
I'm not
too?
sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not
Okay.
sure how you do a session, but like if you think about like Gatsby, like with Gatsby, you do everything at build time.
Yeah.
Like you define how to grab all of your data at build time, but sometimes your data might be too dynamic for that, or
Yeah.
you might have like too many blog posts and it might take an hour to build. So with
Yeah.
Next, like it allows you to combine this, and you can say, hey, if something is really static, just go ahead and just generate it at build time. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about it. If it's more dynamic, you can you can define how to like get it like from the server. I'm
Yeah.
like again like that. That's something I know about all these ideas, and I know they do a lot of collaboration with the React team, the Chrome team. So like they're trying to optimize like the whole ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
It's very cool.
they're doing
Yeah.
cool things.
Yeah. See, this is why I'm trying to get to the point where I'm focused, because otherwise I'd definitely be like going through all these things and be like, oh, that's cool. Oh, this is cool. So yeah, that's very cool. Yeah. One last thing. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, because I feel that sometimes I feel that as well, that I'm distracted, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of like many more things connect than we realize. Like even if you learn something that seems like unrelated and scattered and maybe not really building on something you did before,
Yeah.
it might, like, I always notice that I can borrow ideas from most things I learn about.
Yeah.
And use those ideas in my existing projects and my existing work. So like I don't think I've ever learned something that I thought was like wasted knowledge. Or
Yeah. No, I feel you. And I don't want to imply like going through that. Like I don't want to imply that that's like a waste. It's just I feel like if my goal is to try to produce more things, which is like what my goal is for the year, like I want to do a little bit less of just jumping from thing to thing and more like find something, learn it really well, like maybe force myself to write an article on it or something like that before moving on. And then I feel like I don't know, that will help the goal of being more productive. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think too, just like outside of technical work too, like a lot of my experiences as a father, I feel like come into play a lot when I'm in my code. I know it sounds weird, but or at least in my job, maybe not in my code specifically, but at least in my job in terms of like, you know, finding connections there. Our brains are extremely good at like just taking a bunch of stuff that you feed into it and just like neural netting its way through to find like interesting connections and different ideas that way. So I absolutely agree. Like just like throwing some more. It's almost like our fish, our brains in this little like fish bowl, and we're like feeding it some flakes of like, here's a YouTube video from like Fireship.io or something like that, and it's like, hey, go process that brain. Let me know what you get in a couple days. Let me sleep on it. You know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sometimes you don't realize at the moment, but then later on, and that's why I enjoy learning so much. Just connecting, like the moment two pieces of knowledge connect. Like I thought, yes, okay,
yes,
so much. Yes,
they connect and they release like a little hit of dopamine with it. And you're like, ah, exactly.
Like some sparks as well. Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta do some CSS animations to go with it. Right. Well, dude, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for coming by, for chatting. Anything else you want to chat about before we wrap up?
Nothing specific. Yeah, just really enjoyed it, and hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, man. Anytime you want to talk about this, like reactivity or something like that, or RxJS, send me another one of like those. You know, keep them coming. we'll keep chatting. I really look forward to it.
I'll show it to you next week.
What's that?
I actually have something saved. I'll show it to you next week. Like there was a point this week where like, why is this working in this way? And I need to.
Yes. Very cool. I look forward to seeing that. But okay. Yeah, thanks everyone for stopping by, Raj. You're awesome. Thank you so much for coming by and for doing the cool stuff you do and for chatting with me. I really appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Zach. See you. Yep.